Every choice we make entails a cost. That's why it's a choice. If there wasn't a cost, there wouldn't be a choice. You would just do it. A choice means you've got to make a sacrifice. I'm doing this instead of that. You're sacrificing time, you're sacrificing money, you're sacrificing opportunity. That's what a choice entails. Some choices are just things we do. They're transactional choices. Some choices are transformational, where the choice itself can change our lives. Those are the choices we make, not because of some kind of extraneous factor, not because of convenience or expedience, but we make a choice that comes from a very deep place within us. When a choice is made from a place of neshama, a choice is made from our soul, it's made from a place of faith and emunah, then the choice has the capacity of being transformational. Ad שתשקע עבודת כוכבים מפיהם Avodah Zarah Daf Zayin Amud Aleph. We're going to learn two worldviews in the understanding of a statement of Shmuel in the Gemara. The one worldview is the Rav Yo, and the other is Ri. They are both Baalei Tosfos. They are both, in fact, founders of the Tosfos movement. And everything all the richness that we have in the thousands of Tosfos that we have. The one is the Rav Yo. The Rav Yo lived in the same time as Rabbeinu Tam, as Rashi's grandsons, and was the forerunner, the founder really of or part of that school that started the German school of Tosfos. And the Ri was really the founder of the French school of Tosfos. So we had these two schools developing in France and in Germany simultaneously. The Rav Yo was the father of the German, the Ri, the father of the French. And there's a different approach. The way they understand things is different, and we'll see that. The Rav Yo is so important. I found in one of the editions of the Rav Yo, was a son-in-law of the Ravan. The Ravan was really the founder of that movement, the grandson of the Ravan. And I found just a comment in the introduction to one of the editions of the Rav Yo, where a big Talmud Chacham from the 15th century, the 16th century, who lived in Crete actually. It was interesting when we visited Crete last year. I wondered who was there, and I didn't really know. I didn't realize that Rabbi Leo Kapshali lived in Herculon in Crete, and he says that he learned from his father that Kol makom she'ata motzei divrei aravya aseh oznecha ka'afar chesed. Whenever you find a Rav Yo, apply your ear like just absolutely take in everything he says. Umina lo tazuz, and don't move from his words. Vayaomer shesvarotav yesharot ma'od v'chol deyotav mechuvarot biyoter. And my father used to say that the views of the Rav Yo are absolutely straight and absolutely clear. So we're talking about somebody very great, certainly equally great as the Ri. The statement in the Gemara that we're dealing with is a statement of Shmuel, which is quite a radical statement. Shmuel says, Halokeach avadim min ha'oved kochavim. If you buy a slave from a non-Jew, so now when the slave leaves the ownership of the non-Jew and begins to be employed by a Jewish person, that slave takes on the dinim, that all the chiyuvim, all the obligations that apply to a woman. So he's, to a large extent, a Jew. He is a Jew. Although he's still a slave, he's working in a Jewish home, he's already a Jew, and he's chayiv with a whole lot of the mitzvot. Afal pi shemalo v'tavlo, there's one area in which, says Shmuel, we don't consider him Jewish. Even though he's gone to the mikveh, which he has to do, even though he has had a bris, which he has to do. So before the slave joins the Jewish family, he has to have a bris, has to have mikveh, goes through a conversion process. So he's checked all the boxes. He's gone through the conversion. In every way, we treat him as a Jew. And nevertheless, osin yain nesech. If he touches the wine is treif. The wine is yain nesech. Well, why? He's technically a Jew. A strange thing Shmuel says. Ad shetshka avodat kochavim mipiem. Until they stop talking about their idols. Not just stop thinking about that, until they stop talking about their idols. How long is that? That generally takes 12 months. Takes a year after the person's living in a Jewish environment, takes him a year for him to stop talking about his idolatry. Radical. Says the Rav Yo, not so radical. So the Rav Yo restricts, he narrows the radicalness, if there's such a word, of Shmuel's statement. And he says, this is talking about this is where the slave is forced to convert. You've bought the slave, he has no say in the matter. The two owners, it's like these basketball players. They get traded from one team to another. They don't have a whole lot to say. The basket players are modern equivalent of avodim, of slaves in those. They just happen to be slaves with a high price tag. But they're slaves. They're traded, just like slaves are traded. And they don't have any say into where they get traded. So in that situation, that's why the conversion doesn't work. Imagine a basketball player is traded to a Jewish team, and he's told to be part of this team, you've got to convert. Otherwise, the millions and millions of dollars in your contract, you're not going to get them. So it's okay, convert. His yain is still yain nesech for 12 months until he stops speaking about his avodah zarah. But if he does it willingly, then of course he's allowed immediately. So Shmuel is not such a big chidush. It's just because we know that's altogether in the laws of conversion. If a person converts for ulterior motives, the conversion is not that valid. Yeah, the conversion is valid. He's gone through everything. But there's still an element of force in it, and therefore it's not yain nesech. And further, he goes on to say that in our countries, the slaves in Europe at that time, when they traded slaves, they were traded willingly, and they converted willingly, and therefore this din wouldn't apply. Shmuel's din wouldn't apply. The magnificently says, no, but that's not what Shmuel says. Shmuel doesn't make that condition. He says simply, he doesn't give a condition. He just said any slave. If you've acquired a slave, even though they've gone through the conversion process, their wine is still yain nesech. If they touch the wine, we can't have it. And in any case, Ravio, I'll have you know, that even a slave has to be converted by free will. You can't force convert a slave, as we learned in Yevomis. He's got to agree to it, otherwise it's not a conversion in any case. So why is he different from any other conversion? He is different. Even though the slave says, yes, I'm happy to convert. Are you sure you're willing to convert? Yes. Are you giving up your old religion? Yes. I'm happy, everything's good. He converts, he's absolutely into it. Mikol makom eimat rabo alav. Still, in the back of his mind is the compelling force of his owner. His owner is telling him, you've got to do this. And his well-being is dependent on his owner, and so he doesn't resist the owner. Even though he says, and as far as he knows consciously, it's his free will, but there's a different element. There's the owner lurking in the background, exerting some subconscious force on him. Ve'eno mitgayer belev shalem, and that's not called a full heart. Aval, says the Rebbe, however, ovdei kochavim shemalim v'tovlim mirtzonam u'leda'atam, just a regular non-Jew who decides to convert, a real idol worshipper, but he decides to convert on the day of the conversion. From that day onwards, nishtaka shem avodat kochavim mpihem miyad. They forget about their idolatry. They don't talk about it again. It's done. Umutar magar b'yayin miyad, and so they're allowed to touch the wine immediately. It's only slaves. Even if a slave does it willingly, his yayin is yayin nesech. But a regular convert, if they go through the conversion process, it's nishtaka shem avodat kochavim mpihem miyad. And I struggled with this Tosfos, with the Ri. Really, in a moment. So yesterday they were talking about the avodah zarah. You dip them in the mikveh, and today it's gone. How does that happen? So we learned yesterday. We didn't have time to go into it. The shaylos and tshuvos of the Ben Ish Chai, called Rav Pa'alim, the Ben Ish Chai, the man of God of Baghdad in the turn of the 20th century. And he wrote, among other things, that Chen Rahav, think of Rahav Azona, Rahav, the prostitute of Jericho. Yeshua sends the spies there, she protects them and hides them. She converts, and they save her when they come and conquer Jericho. Shezachta linevuah keshebau Pinchas v'Kalev etzla. She got prophecy. Now you remember some Sefer we've learned many times that prophecy doesn't mean like the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu. We had some Sefer that whenever anybody has a strong intuition, a knowledge, a clarity of knowledge that is not just a gut instinct. It's a real intuition that comes from a deep place. That's a form of Nevuah. It's a form of Ruach HaKodesh. And he quoted the Rahav as saying, in our Beis HaMedrash, we have this quite often, that people have this Ruach HaKodesh. And the Chassam Sofer develops the idea and says that whenever you've got an insight that is way beyond your pay grade, it comes from you don't know where. A talent that comes from you don't know where. A person writes a poem or a book or a piece of music and you don't know where it comes from. He doesn't have the skills for that. The Yenuka that we had yesterday, a little child knows something. Where does he or she know it from? When those things happen, it's a kind of nevuah, it's a kind of Ruach HaKodesh. And so says the Ben Ish Chai with Rahav. Now you've got to understand Rahav, as we'll see in Rashi and Yoshua, Rahav, when they come, is 50 years old when they meet her. She's been practicing as the mistress of the princes of Yericho, of the princes of Canaan, for 40 years. She's been practicing. They meet her and she converts. After 40 years of being a zonah, she converts. And at that moment, at the moment she accepted the conversion, an unbelievably large soul came into her. That when you make that decision of conversion, you acquire a neshama, you acquire a new soul. And she made that decision. Explains the yes, that's what happens when a non-Jew converts of their own free will and pays this enormous price to become Jewish. Every choice entails a price, but the choice to become Jewish entails an enormous price. When they make that choice, investing that level of cost in a decision, in a lifestyle choice, brings about the transformation of the size that Rahav can even get nevuah, can even come to prophecy in an instant, to transform from prostitute to prophet. That can happen that's the power of making an inconvenient choice. That's the power of making a values-driven choice, of making a choice that comes from the Shama, that comes from deep in your soul, making a choice that comes from a place of Emunah. That's its transformational capacity. However, says the Ri, in the case of a slave, since there are extraneous forces bearing on the slave, it's not purely from the place of neshama. Yes, they agree, but the agreement is a mental agreement. Yes, I agree. I sign on the dotted line. I know what it entails. I'm willing to give up the other things of my life. I'm willing to become Jewish. But, says the Ri, go deep into his soul and you'll realize that's not where it's coming from. It's coming from the fact that his master, his employer, wants him to do that. So that's amazing, to understand the transformational power of a choice. But it doesn't work with Rahav. I don't understand the Ben Ish Chai. Look at the psukim with Rahav. Vatomer Anashim, she says to these two men. The two men are Kalev and Pinchas, Ben Elazar. Important to know that. And she says, Yadati ki natan Hashem lachem et. I know God's given you the land. I know you're going to win this war. And we're terrified of you. And all the people of the land are trembling in your presence. Because we've heard what happened with the Red Sea. And we've heard what you did to the two kings of the Emori, Sichon and Og. You destroyed them. And we've heard, we're terrified. And nobody will stand anymore. Tell me, is she converting because she comes from a deep place of a neshama? Or is she afraid of her boss like basketball player? Why is she converting? How does the Ben Ish Chai bring Rahav as the example of the great neshama that comes into somebody at the moment of conversion? But you see it in the next words, which she didn't have to say. She could have stopped there. Look what she says then. Ki Hashem Elokeichem hu Elokim bashamayim mimal v'ala aretz mitachat. Piece that we say in the Aleinu 3 times a day. Because Hashem, your God, is the God of the heaven above and the earth below. Hashem hu ha'elokim. That's what we say in Yom Kippur when we finish Yom Kippur. Rahav gets to that. Yes, I've analyzed historic events of the last 40 years to get to that. Yes, I see your power, but I also know that it comes from Hashem. This is not just some random power. Because, as we learned yesterday in the 2 days ago in the Chassam Sofer, there is a force in the world that biases us towards explaining events randomly. We will rather explain something randomly than attribute Emunah to it, than attribute Hashem to it. And that's a force in the world. That's what keeps our Bechira intact. If there wasn't that bias in the world, we would have no choice. And so it's true, everybody saw those events that Rahav saw. All the Canaanim saw the events that Rahav saw. Amalek saw the events that Rahav saw. But only she chooses to resist the bias of randomness and opt to interpret it as Hashem Elokeichem Hu Elokim b'Shamayim Mima'al v'al ha'aretz mitachah. And it's the same as today. Look at does the world not get it, that Hashem's been involved in what's happening? No, they'll use every other explanation but to say that it's Hashem. There's a force in the world. That's what the force is. The force of a Yetzer Hara. It's a power in the world that biases us towards attributing randomness to events rather than giving it meaning, rather than truly understanding at the root of its cause. So yes, Rahav talks about the fear that's instilled, but she goes beyond the fear. And she says, the reason I'm converting is because Hashem Elokeichem Hu Elokim b'Shamayim Mima'al v'al ha'aretz mitachah. What happened to her in that moment? She knew the whole story for the last 40 years. She was 10 years old when Yam Suf took place. And she's lived reading in the newspapers and seeing on TV everything that was happening to the Jewish people. She knew it, she saw it. Why at this moment does she convert? Look at the words in the Rav Pa'alim. V'chein Rahav keshezichta li nevuah keshebau Pinchas v'Kalev etzla. When Pinchas and Kalev knocked on her door, she took one look at them and she realized what the Ribono Shel Olam is. Do you realize what we've just learned? You can look at miracles. You can look at the splitting of the Red Sea. You can look at Mon in the desert. You can look at the conquest of the kings. You can look at anything that happened. You can look at the 10 plagues, and you can attribute it all to randomness. But when you see an Adam Gadol, when you see a great human being, when you see a Jew and the choices he makes, and the transformation in him that comes about through the choices that he makes. When you look at a Kalev ben Yefuneh in the face, when you look at a Pinchas ben Elazar in the face, you look at that and you say, I get it. I understand the Ribono Shel Olam. That's why I used to make it a point when my children were very young to take them to meet the Gedolei Yisrael. In those days it was easier than it is today because there weren't so many people who wanted to do it. Now everybody wants to do it. It was easy. They were happy to see people. Nobody wanted to see them. It was happy when a father came and brought their children. They loved it. Now it's difficult, they don't have the time just to see. That's when Rabbi Elia said to my father, I want you to see Rabbi Issa Zalman. I know you won't have time to speak to him. You're on the way to the airport. It doesn't matter. Stick your head in the Beis HaMedrash and see him because your life will never be the same. And that's my father, somebody who saw many Gedolei Yisrael. See Rabbi Issa Zalman because your life will never be the same. When you see a Gadol, when you see somebody who is truly great, not somebody who has the title Gadol, but you see somebody who is truly great, you see somebody who's made these choices, who's elevated themselves, transformed themselves. Everything becomes clear. You understand Hashem, you understand the world, you understand events, you understand miracles, because on their face you see Hashem. I've always said, I've never seen Hashem, but I've sat in the presence of people who are looking at Hashem in the face. When I sat in the presence of Gedolei Yisrael, of great Talmidei Chachomim, of great Tzaddikim, you see on their face, on Rabbi Lapin's face, on Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik's face, you see on their face, they see God. You can see that they're looking at Hashem. I don't see Hashem, but I can see that they see Hashem. You see that on the face. You're with somebody who's living with Hashem. So now all of a sudden you understand where Hashem is and how Hashem exists. And you can see it in everything that happens around you. That's the importance of connecting and engaging with great human beings, with human beings who have made those choices. That's the choice, that's the event that moved Rahav. She wasn't moved by Kriyas Yam Suf. She wasn't moved by the Malchai Amori. She wasn't moved by her fear. She was moved by these two men that she encountered. And she said, if this is what a human being can be, I want to be a Jew. I want to be a Jew like you. Says the Ben Ish Chai at that time. An enormous soul comes into her, as comes into any of us who make incredible transformational choices. A great soul comes into us. And that's enough of a soul to transform the person from Gentile to Jew with all the halachot, not only all the other halachot, but even the din of Yain Nesef, because immediately tishtaca avodas kochovim mipiem. At that moment, when you encounter a Kalev and a Pinchas, nishtaka avodas Zarah mipiem, you'll never mention your idol again, because at that point, everything becomes clear.